Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I hope you are safe and sound and healthy and watching us today on organizing in the time of COVID-19. This is Firoz Manji from Daraja Press. And today we have at least two, and maybe a little later on, other uh, people who will be joining us. Brown Mutsao and Kea Febato, working with the Benchmarks Foundation. Um, you may have heard that very recently we had the Alternative Mining Indaba held in South Africa, which brought together activists from across South Africa, Southern Africa, and across indeed the continent. A really important event, and we would like to welcome our guests and to say thank you for joining us, Brown. Thank you for joining us, Kea.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for inviting us, and greetings to your audience.
Well, thank you for joining. Well, perhaps we might
Hi
start
everyone.
by. Hi, well, welcome. Um, Perhaps we might start. Just give us an idea. I'm sure people would be interested to know who is the Benchmarks Foundation. What is that?
Well, the history of the benchmarks it's fairly long, but to cut the long story short, it is an institution that started pre '94, the conception of it pre democratic dispensation in South Africa. It was an idea that was hatched by the churches to say at some point apartheid will come to an end, and when apartheid do come to an end, there will be a need to have an institution to advise the new dispensation on which companies have a sense of corporate social responsibility. Because when it's Uhuru, many will remember that once post 93, 94, we have Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu going all over the world and telling the world that it's Uhuru and they can come back and invest in South Africa. And they were hovering the investment to come into South Africa. The dilemma with that is that already around the 1980s, the churches in South Africa had a prophetic role to play in society as we believe even today. They believe that there will be companies that will want to come and invest in South Africa, and some of those companies they would not have a sense of corporate social responsibility. They would not have a sense of what sectoral determination act means. They would not have an idea of what basic conditions of employment are. They would not have any understanding of things like maternity leave and so on. Some of them will be the Chinese company, and from where they come from, they would not be respecting the rights of the people. Therefore, they needed to establish an institution that will advise the church so that the church itself can advise the government of which companies that they need to invest in South Africa. You might know when the stringent conditions that we had to, that Walmart, when it wanted to buy Massmart in South Africa, they had to go through. It is because of the role that the benchmarks and other labor movements and other civil society, like the one that Kia is working for. She's working for Alternative Information Development, AIDC.
AIDC. Okay, great.
AIDC. She works for AIDC. She will introduce it in full. But it is through the contribution of partners like AIDC, Benchmarks, LRIC, and many other organizations, labor movements in South Africa who resisted and who gave a clear position to say, listen, if Walmart want to buy Massmart in South Africa, it must understand that there are certain conditions that the South African constitution, the South African labor market companies have to live and abide by. Those includes things like maternity leave, basic conditions, sectoral determination act, um, and many other regulations that we have that governs labor in this country. And for the first time,
Right.
we hear through history that it was the first time that Massmart was forced to agree to minimum agreements of a particular country for them to buy a company or a subsidiary. They were forced by the work that we did with many other organizations. And since then, the benchmarks has been in action. It was established a little bit later, but by the time when the benchmarks was set up, interesting thing happened. What is so called South African listed companies, they started to invade the whole of Southern Africa, Zambia, Mozambique, Lesotho, and so on. And the very same South African companies, listed companies, they started to behave like any other international multinational. Immediately when they got to Zambia, they did not employ locals. They brought people from South Africa, managers from South Africa. They did not procure goods locally. They had to fly in and ship in things into South Africa, including small things like dough. At some point, they had to mix dough in South Africa and fly it in Zambia. And when it gets to Zambia, the only thing that had to happen was to bake it. And we had to fight with companies like Shoprite Checkers, amongst others. And we told them, listen, this is unacceptable. You can purchase wheat from the local farmers, because if you bring wheat and dough from South Africa, what does it mean to local farmers in Zambia? Can't they be trained to produce the goods that are sufficient to be good for your market, to sit on your shelf and so on? And over, I think, a period of about 5 years and so on, we started seeing things change. They started to behave differently. Things like wrapping, you would get a sweet that is, or a chocolate or a bread that is wrapped, and it will say, when you look at the sticker there, a product from South Africa. So we said, well, why can't you package locally? Because if we want to create evenly growing economies, it means South Africa have to understand it needs to learn it needs to share its capacity. We need to develop packaging capacity in those countries, so that companies like Shoprite, Woolworths, Game, and so on, if they want to work into neighboring countries, they need to provide capacity, and the very same capacity that we have in South Africa, it can be provided there, and local employment can be created to the locals in those countries. One of the things that we discovered was that they will take managers, and unfortunately in South Africa we still talk in terms of racial imbalances. We still talk of the black, whites, Indian colors, and so on. But they would take historically what is hello?
Yeah, carry
Can you
on.
hear me?
Yes, we can
Oh,
hear
okay.
you.
Okay, so something went on my screen, and I was wondering what's happening. Okay, that's fine. So what happened is that we were a bit concerned about that, to say, listen, they take South African managers to manage those companies, and there was no transfer of skill. Later on, we started advancing to say, listen, you need to transfer skills, make sure that the South African managers who are working in those countries, they train the local people so that they can take over the management. The company will still remain a South African company, but they need to be managed by the local people so that there's transfer of skills. And over, I think the last, I think Benchmarks has been in existence for about 18 years now. And over the
Wow.
last 10 years, we started operating, we started to see a whole lot of those things started to happen, not only in Zambia, in Botswana, and we've been tracking. So we continue to be one of the NGOs that track what is so-called South African listed multinationals, both in mining sector, retail sector, and telecommunication. We track them where they are in Africa, and we check the issues of compliance. All we try to do is to
Right.
ensure that what they do while they are in South Africa, they don't behave differently when they get to Lesotho, when they get to Nigeria, and so on and so on. So we try to ensure that if they are here and then there's a basic wage, they will have the same thing in the neighboring countries, and it must be aligned to the reality of those countries and so on. They shouldn't just get to Lesotho and start exploiting the workers, claiming that no, it's not in South Africa. There has to be a minimal survival wage, that has to be paid to people, a just wage, and so on and so on, including
Right.
issues like protective clothing. One of the things that we discovered very fascinating in Zambia was that some of the South African companies, when they get there, they would not give workers protective clothing. You will have to work with your own clothes to go to work. But in South Africa, if you work in a retail store, they will give you clothing. If you work in the mining sector, they will give you protective clothing. You have a hat and so on. But in those countries at the time when Benchmark started, people were working with their own clothes. You go to work and you go there with your own shoes and your own trousers and so on. So, but over a period of time, with the work that we've been doing through local partners as well, because we are aware that we do not want to introduce what is so now known as South African hegemony, that South African NGO comes into our country and then start doing things for us. We started initiating partnership research with local institutions, local universities, and ensure that they advocate for their own issues with their government, while we take up
Right.
the issues with the company in South Africa and also in that country. And over a period of time, things have changed. It would be unfair for me to just claim credit only to to the Benchmarks Foundation. I think we can only achieve that through working with other partners like AIDC and many others.
Right. So, Kea, is it not yet Uhuru?
Never actually at the moment. Yeah, no, not yet Uhuru at all. Yeah,
Tell us about your work.
cool. So I am based at the Alternative Information and Development Center, based in Cape Town, South Africa. But we do a lot of regional work in the African continent, so a lot of Southern African work, and also a lot of work internationally. And what I focus on is basically corporate accountability, but from the other side, which is the ideas around building counter power. So we're linked and we work around a campaign called the Southern African Campaign to Dismantle Corporate Power. And out of the Southern African Campaign to Dismantle Corporate Power, we hosted a permanent people's tribunal for about 3 years. And through that permanent people's tribunal, the idea was for us to get a thorough sense on what corporate abuse looks like in the Southern African region, but from the lens of those who are affected. So affected communities came through, and NGOs and grassroots organizations presented different cases against transnational corporations or even states in Southern Africa. So as I speak right now, we have about 20 different cases covering the Southern African region of different examples of corporate abuse, and I guess in essence, actually corporate impunity.
Right. Well, I was a member of the Permanent People's Tribunal on the transnational corporations in Southern Africa. The last hearing that was held in Joburg, and I mean, what struck me there was the extraordinary lack of accountability of the mining sector, the degree to which it refuses to allow even basic democratic practice, such as communities being able to say no to the involvement of these mining companies, and of course, there's been a long history, both under colonialism, well, under apartheid, as you call it, of the state being terrorizing of mining workers. And since then, we have seen Marikana and the killing of mine workers there. So clearly, mining has been a really central issue in South Africa, and so it would be very interesting then to hear from you what happened, what was the alternative mining Indaba, and what are the main issues that have come up, especially in a situation where, as I understand it, there is very little protection for workers under conditions of a raging pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the mining Indaba.
So we,
In fact,
a few colleagues, sorry, go ahead, Brown.
go ahead.
Kea, okay.
All
Kea,
right.
go ahead.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Sorry. We took part in one of the sessions as part of the Alternative Mining Indaba with a few colleagues of mine and colleagues from the Benchmarks Foundation and a few lawyers too. And the session that we took part in was around sort of speaking and unfolding what we mean by the right to say no. And just to sort of expand around it, the right to say no is actually not a campaign necessarily against mining, but it's a campaign against extractivism. And we believe that extractivism is actually the process of taking from the soil. So mega projects that take from the soil, take from the earth, take from the people is what people are trying to and are pushing to say no to. And I believe, and Comrade Brown could also add on to that, the Alternative Mining Indaba has been trying to work to be a platform for affected communities, civil society organizations, and even faith-based organizations to come together to grapple about contemporary issues around the extractivist development paradigm that plagues the African continent and the Southern African region, and to speak about how all of this, all of this dirty extractivism can actually be done differently, and also look at ways in which we can stop and curb the shrinking tax revenues of different states.
Right, right. So, Comrade Brown, tell us
Yes,
more.
leadership. I think Kia nailed it. There are a number of things that happened with regard to. I mean, she's quite right. We had a session that was organized inside the Alternative Mining Indaba. And Alternative Mining Indaba, maybe just to give a bit of a background of what that is. It is a platform that sits parallel to Africa Mining Indaba. For the last more than 25 years, if you go downtown Cape Town around the ICC, where the National Convention Center is, you would swear that the whole place has been taken over by the penguins, because people who are there, they wear black and white. They wear black and white suits. You know, they look like penguins when you walk there. They are all wearing black suits and with white shirts. You know, they walk around and you would swear it's just penguins everywhere. Uh, and there are thousands and thousands of mining CEOs of any mine that you can think of, from the smallest subsidiaries to the biggest, the biggest mining companies that you can think of, to the mining consultants, to the companies that are selling machinery, your Scania, the Swiss companies, the investors, and so on. So the whole of Cape Town in February for the last 20 years or more, it has been taken over by these people, and this process was a fairly quiet one. Nobody knew what was happening. You could just see these corporate-looking people walking in and out of there, and the Cape Town was swollen. All the hotels were booked out, and nobody knew what was happening until we picked it up with a partner organization in Cape Town called FOKISA of EJN, Economic Justice Network, that is based in Cape Town. That, listen, there seems to be something that is happening here, and nobody seems to be attending that meeting, and it seems to be only be attended by the corporates. And then we discovered, no, man, all the CEO of the mining houses, they've been meeting in South Africa, and not even a single civil society has been invited to the event. Not the community have been invited, and they come and meet in Africa because South Africa is one of the countries where large industrial mining has been happening for a very long time. And we thought, as part of civil society, but mostly as part of the religious institutions, to say, can't we start a parallel process that will this time bring in the voice of the community affected and impacted by mining? We are using those words cautiously and deliberately, because there are those who are impacted and there are those who are affected. Those who are impacted, it will be those who the mine is on their land. You know, it's just a neighbor, just you cross the fence and you're in the mine yard. Those who are affected, it might be those who are affected by dust particles, because the air shed travel for about 50 kilometers, so it affects communities that are far off. And we thought, hang on, we are going to create an alternative space, and we're going to bring in communities that are affected and impacted by mining closer to where this Africa Mining Indaba is taking place. And we're going to get this community that their voice are never heard to come and speak for themselves. We're going to speak for them. We're going to invite them so that they can speak for themselves, talk about their experiences, and try to get an attention of Africa Alternative Mining Indaba. At first, when the process started, we received a lot of resistance, because the Africa Mining Indaba wrote to us. They threatened that we cannot use the word Alternative Mining Indaba. And we said, listen, the word Indaba, we can use it because it's an African word. You can't come to Africa and tell us we won't be talking about, Indaba. It's an African word. So you can't come to Africa and fight us over that name to start with. And then they started sending in lawyers, and then we resisted until ultimately they decided to realize, because we started now organizing pickets, going to where they are, and insisting on going in. If not, we're now threatening to disrupt their processes. And all we needed was saying, listen, we are not fighting you. We are not saying don't meet. We are saying open the space for the community that are affected and impacted by mining. Open a space for civil society to participate in your process. We want to understand what you're discussing. We want to understand what are the issues. We want you to take into consideration how the communities are feeling and what they're experiencing through your own processes. And it took about 3, 4, 5 years. Now they started to be receptive. They started to open up and say, listen, let's start talking. And they started sending some of their delegates into an alternative mining indaba to come and listen. But I think after about 2 years, they are I think because we would allow their own people, would see these penguins starting to walk into our meetings. And that's how we'd notice that, okay, they have interest. They're sending people to come and listen. And then after about 2 years, we learned that they actually went into their own meeting and they reported. They said, listen, there's another event that is taking place just across, and it's called themselves Alternative Mining Indaba. It is very important for us to open space for those people to come inside and tell us about what they experience, because they're talking about the very same issues that we're talking about too. But this time it is a bottom-up approach. While where we are, it is a corporate-led process that only talks to government, that only talks to the corporates, that talks to shareholders, to the investors. But we are not hearing the people that we are impacting on. Isn't it advisable for us to start opening space and engaging with those people? And there was a decision that was passed at the Alternative Mining Indaba to say, no, we need to give this guy an ear. Let's bring them in. We'll agree with them. Next year when they have the event, we'll send in a delegation into their thing, and they can come and see what we are discussing and so on. And that's how the process started. But anyway, that's the short history of where Alternative Mining Indaba it started. And at the Alternative Mining Indaba this year, we held the first one electronically, because also the Africa Mining Indaba was held electronically because of the second resurgence of COVID-19 in South Africa. And it was held electronically. We held ours a week later after theirs, because we wanted to be clued up. We wanted to participate into the other African Mining Indaba, so that we could actually filter some of the discussions that they had into our own discussions, so that when we have our own final declaration, it can take into consideration some of the things that they were reflecting. And the topic that Kia introduced was one of the topical sessions within the Alternative Mining Indaba, to say, how can we ensure that the communities become part of the decision makers? How can we make sure that the communities take over some of this corporation? How can they own this means of production? Because they are sitting on minerals, and historically in South Africa, they've been moved from their ancestral land by apartheid under very harsh conditions. Now, the very same companies, the very same people who moved them from their historical land so that they can make way for them to go and build their economic life, they are following them into the rural areas, the areas where they are less developed, and now trying to force them off their land because of the minerals that they are sitting on. They didn't know at the time when they were moving them, were actually placing them on top of platinum, on top of gold, on top of precious metal that you can find in South Africa. So that was one of the discussions that we picked up. With regard to the issue that you raised with regard to the workers and COVID, we've picked up that in South Africa in particular, there has been a number of underreporting when it comes to people who are working in the mines and how they are affected by COVID. Mm-hmm. Because remember, a lot of mines that we have in South Africa, those are deep level mines. You know, you have to go 3-4 kilometers underground. And for you to breathe, there has to be a ventilation system which takes air from outside, and then they pump it on underground. And underground, at any given time, you will find thousands and thousands of workers working there. And if one of them has picked up COVID, and through ventilation system, because there's no air reticulation, the air circulates underground, you find that most workers, they started complaining. And this was kept under wraps. It was not reported. But whenever you talk to the community members, they will say, listen, no, we know so and so who's infected. We know so and so who's infected. Because even the cage that they use to go underground, there's no social distancing. For the cage, you might have about 30, 40 men pressed to one another, you know, chest to chest on the cage that takes them underground. And that's how this problem of COVID. And if you picked up on the stats, you will pick up that the rate of COVID, it was fairly higher in areas where mining operations were taking place in South Africa than in other areas. And here's what is fascinating. When the first lockdown was introduced and the second one was introduced, a lot of workers started to move back to their labor sending areas, to the Eastern Cape, to Lesotho. Now, the second lockdown that just happened now, when the borders were closed, we just learned in Zimbabwe, Zambia, the COVID was not as many, But immediately the mines were closed in South Africa and the workers went back to the labor sending areas. Boom! They took COVID from the mines into those countries. COVID in Zambia started increasing. COVID in Zimbabwe, it started increasing. Everybody started complaining about it, which indicates that the mines are also a source of a problem when it comes to mining, to this COVID pandemic, especially the underground mining. At some point, they allowed the open cast to operate at full speed, but they ask the underground mines to work at half capacity. But everything is back to normal now. We have phase 2. And when we talk to our monitors on the ground in Rustenburg, in Limpopo, and so on, they complain. They say, listen, what we see on the ground and what we hear on the news are two different things. What we are experiencing, what we are seeing on the ground, the people that we are seeing on the ground, they are not reflected by the mainstream media. So there's a contradiction there. There's somebody who's hiding information with regard to how this COVID is affecting the workers and what is the role of mining in particular. So mining has really been a bit of a problem, I think, for the mining host communities in particular. There has been some effort. We've been trying to track how many mines that are assisting the communities during the time of lockdown. People did not have food and so on. There has been some mines that have extended their hand, but there are a number of mines that are continuing with brutality. You know, they continue as if nothing is happening. This morning I received another letter. Last week I received another letter of new mining companies moving into the outflung areas, you know, the areas in the rural areas where media would not be able to access them. And they're saying, no, the president of South Africa has announced that the mine is a sunset, it's a sunrise industry. And because of COVID, to try and rebuild the economy, we need to allow more and more mining to take place. And in the process, we are starting to see the communities being moved forcefully from their own land, the traditional communities and so on. We are scheduled to actually attend some of those communities as of next week. So mines still remain a big problem. And I think the campaign that Kia is leading of dismantling corporate power, it has become more and more relevant as time goes by.
Yeah, Kia, tell us more. I mean, is AIDC doing research on this issue, the fact that mine workers are working in the conditions that will propagate and spread of COVID-19?
We're working with our partners and neighbors, or particularly like different trade unions like AMCU, to kind of really blow the whistle on what's taking place. But I think the belly of our work is to also make sure that there isn't a distinction between the said community and workers. Our understanding is that workers are a part of the community. So the demands around protecting workers and making sure that the safety precautions underground and within even the mining operation should transcend into making sure that there's the safety and sort of the sanitation even in community. So for example, in what kind of world does it make sense where mine workers are protected and they have all the PPE gear at the mine, but when you leave the mine and you go home, there's no proper sanitation, there's no roads, and you're living in a shack? So and we know through the social labor plans in South Africa and even in other plans that mining companies sign with different countries, that they're supposed to be, you know, building or contributing to infrastructure development where they're operating. But the bulk and the drive for with the work around corporate power and the right to say no is to make sure that we're working with affected communities to facilitate and build counter power and for communities to reclaim their power back. What's the issue here is that communities and workers haven't been at the forefront of deciding what kind of development takes place where they live, where they are, and where they operate. The decision makers are states and transnational corporations, and all policies and things that are put out are to make sure that capital and TNCs thrive and flourish, and communities and citizens, workers and others don't flourish at all. And I think, from my personal opinion, and through the work that we've been doing, mining and in general extractivist activities are a huge problem and crisis for people in Southern Africa and in the African continent and most other global south countries where extractivist activities are taking place.
So tell us more about the way in which the community is being affected by COVID-19 related to the mines. I mean, I remember when I visited Marikana, the conditions in which workers were living were appalling. And I mean, it's not just down the mines, but where they live are very close together. There's no possibility for physical distancing. And indeed, when I was there were only one or two taps of water. So even the idea of washing your hands is completely mythical. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how communities are affected, and in particular, because we are hearing this across the continent, how women are bearing the brunt of the spread of COVID-19.
Thanks. I mean, the questions that you just posed are extremely exciting questions, and I'm making sure that I'm remembering all of them. I think the big issue is that, for an example, with what Comrade Brown was mentioning, that if a mine worker contracts COVID, whether it be where they are operating or when they're working underground, the particular mine worker has to leave and go into a community to stay and sleep and be able to, replenish themselves in order to go back and work at a mine. And because of most of the conditions in and around the mine and where communities are staying, so there isn't proper roads, there isn't sanitation, and there isn't proper housing. If one person comes into a community or an informal settlement near a mine who is COVID positive, it's very likely that they're going to be able to spread the virus itself. One of the other issues is that, and this can be tracked throughout history, is that mining itself has created small economies or small communities around it. So ever so often when a mine opens, they need to get migrant workers from a different area to come and work in those mines. And because of that, then there's a cluster of then houses and areas that end up coming up, or a small economy gets set up in the area close to the mine. And ever so often, in which, with also the example around Marikana, is that women then come in and also stay and take care of the families and take care of the mine workers. And that's the issue, and that's the point around the unpaid care work that women do in general. But when you're using the mining or the mine worker example, is that now in general conditions, forgetting COVID, that a woman who's staying and who's married or is the partner of a mine worker would then have to take care of the family, take care of the mine worker, and also considering the fact that mine workers are not remunerated the way they're supposed to. So that's the crisis. And then on top of that, that continued unpaid care work is exacerbated with the COVID pandemic, because now, for example, with lockdowns happening, people are not able to move around a lot, and I'm stuck in a small informal settlement, or I'm stuck in a small home. There has never been sanitation. There's never been opportunities to be able to find ways to put food on the table. And now we're told that we should sit at home with one another and now struggle together. And therefore then women then continue to bear an extra burden, because what happens then also, if your partner who's a mine worker then contracts COVID, you're having to find a particular way in order to make sure that you're taking care of that particular person. If that person is not no longer able to get remuneration, so how are you able then to put food onto the table? So now we're having women leaving the already unpaid care work that they're taking part in, trying to find means to put food on the table. That's what many comrades refer to, and many feminist thinkers talk about, the crisis of social reproduction that is compounded and exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. But however, we should also talk about the fact that, particularly in South Africa, and I think in many countries in the global south, issues around mass unemployment, and there's other socioeconomic ills that mass unemployment brings that have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic and leads to women holding doubly the brunt of carrying society on their shoulders, actually.
Right. I mean, what you're both describing to me in terms of migrant workers, in terms of the conditions around the mines, every time we talk about the mining industry in South Africa, I begin to think, are they describing what existed under apartheid? Has anything fundamentally changed in those social relations since 94?
Well, I would say not entirely. It is almost, there are times where you would almost swear that it's almost like removing a particular race and replacing it with another race. But the practice and the experience on the ground, there are certain things that have largely changed. Let me just be fair, maybe to the ruling party. The right of people to move, between the provinces, that you don't have to carry a DOM pass or a permit to go to certain areas. Those things are no longer there. The political rights, the right to vote, the right to movement, they are there. But economic rights remain a greater challenge in South Africa. And that can be seen everywhere you go. And I think in many ways, the existence of COVID have exposed the weaknesses when it comes to economic rights in South Africa, because a lot of people are unemployed. And with COVID-19, and remember, in South Africa at some stage was one of the countries that was affected mostly by HIV/AIDS. You would know that. There was a huge response to getting South Africans to get the what you call antiretroviral during the time of Mbeki because of HIV/AIDS. There's a serious string of people with chronic illnesses in South Africa, like high blood pressure, like depression, because people are not working. And I think COVID-19 has actually exposed South African reality. I can talk about myself. I think I'm a living testament to that. That I have my own house that I have to maintain, but I'm still supporting my parents. I'm still supporting my brother's family. He passed on a few years ago because of not having access to HIV/AIDS and so on. And I find myself at my age supporting 3 or 4 families while you have your own family. During the time of COVID, it was worse because people were put under lockdown. Like Kia said, there are other people that I know, friends and people that we work with, who lives in an informal settlement, in a one shack room, and it's a family. And then when you say you want those people to, what was that? To live in one room, one house room. It's kitchen, it's in one place, bedroom, it's in one place. If you've been to Marikana, you will know what I'm talking about. And then you ask a family of 3, 4 people to isolate and to social distance. I mean, it's not realistic. It will not work. But I want to take you back just before I go deeper into that, because I might get into trouble. I do know with the Steering Committee of Alternative Mining Indaba and some of the board members of the Benchmarks Foundation with regard to the angle and approach that we are taking to the discussion, to say that the benchmarks in particular, including Alternative Mining Indaba, it is a broad church. It brings people who are saying, some of the people that we might be bringing in, they might say, listen, we like mining. We think, and I'm one of those people who would want to be sensible and say, listen, do I love electricity? Electricity comes from mining. I cannot exchange. I'm used to electricity now. The glasses that I'm wearing, the product, of mining. For us, you and I, to be talking on cell phone, it is through the use of mining products. The cobalt that is extracted here, the platinum, all the minerals that you find in this thing. They come from mining. So mining does have a very important, the chair that I'm sitting on, it's a steel chair. It's a product of mining. So mining, it is important. And I need to make it clear that mining is not a foreign concept to Africa. Mining has been happening way before corporates existed, way before the colonizers arrived in Africa. Mining was happening, it's an African concept, it's not new. But what a lot of us are against, it is how mining is done, especially the consumerism, that we see with the large mining sector, that wants to take, and leave everybody, with devastation. So we are opposed to that. But at the same time, there are some of the organizations, including the organization that I work for, where they will say, listen, are we saying, because even our board members will ask that, what are you saying exactly? Are you saying you don't want mining or you want mining? You are part of the campaign that says no to mining in Kolobeni. And the position of the institution that I work for, it's pretty clear. We are saying, first and foremost, we listen to what the communities are saying. If a mine goes to a rural area and says we want to come and mine in your own land, the first thing that we ask is, did you apply the concept of free, prior, informed consent? FPIC, the one of UN principle. are you applying it? Meaning, do you give the community all the information that they need to know about the type of mining that you are bringing to them? Are you only telling them because historically you would find it happens everywhere? You know, it's almost like copy and paste. You can leave South Africa and go to Zambia. You can leave Zambia and go to Swaziland. It's almost like these guys, they are reading from the same textbook. They will go to Zambia, and when they arrive there, they will say, listen, we are bringing you mining, and we can tell you what the benefits of mining are. You're going to get employment. You're going to have infrastructure. We're going to develop roads. You will be like Johannesburg. You know, you'll have skyscrapers, and you'll have all these beautiful things. But they will forget, or they will deliberately omit to tell you what's going to happen to your natural water sources. They will forget to tell you that they're going to pollute your river. They will forget to tell you that they're going to dry off your what do you call it, your wells, your underground water. They will forget to tell you about what's going to happen to your atmospheric water when it rains. There are certain parts of South Africa, when you go to Vanderbilt Park, people there, they're experiencing acid rain because of the amount of flaring that happens from the industry, you know, when they burn these minerals. So the quality of rain in that area, there are certain areas where you can only plant chili because nothing else will grow in that land because of industrial, you know, minerals that came from mining and so on. So they will forget about these things. They will forget to tell you what's going to happen to your grazing field. You know, will you still be able to keep your own cattle? Where in Africa, people still keep cattle and so on. So they deliberately omit to tell you about those things. And what we do as an institution, we are often asked benchmarks, what is your position? Because you seem to be on communities. For example, we have a community out in Limpopo where they said they willingly moved because they wanted mining to take place, but because of the promises that were made. And what we said to them is that, listen, you need to weigh first the benefits compared to what you stand to lose. You should understand you will never be able to use that land again. Once it's gone, it's finished. You know, they're going to leave a big hole. They are not going to replace that hole, and so on and so on. If you, with all those advantages and disadvantages, that's what we do as an institution. We go to the community. We don't say no to mining. We go to them and then we say to, listen, these are the advantages of mining. They are promising you roads. Most probably they will come and build you roads. They are promising you skyscrapers. They will most probably build a city near you, not necessarily where you are, but it will be near you. They are promising you jobs. Some of you might get jobs, but understand they are bringing their own labor that are skilled from elsewhere. Don't think that it's automatic that you're going to get jobs. They are promising you that there will be flood of people. Understand that there will be so many people who will be 4, 5, 6, sometimes 100 times the number of original residents of that community. So your community structure is going to change completely. If you are run by the chief, you need to understand the whole place is going to be totally different. You cannot use the same system anymore. So we try and give them those sides. And if the committee still decide, well, after having learned about all these things, what the mine is telling us about the benefits, but also the risks that we have to take when it comes to mining, we still decide we want to go ahead. We have a moral responsibility as an institution to accompany that community and to ensure that continuous consent on the operation of the mine it's gotten by the mine from the community about what they want to do. We try and accompany the community to ensure that what was promised and what is written in the social labor agreements, it gets manifested. You know, they deliver on those things. But there are certain areas where we would obviously, like in Kolobeni, where benchmarks was a party to it. Somebody once asked me that question to say, but benchmarks, you are also a co-applicant. You know, the research report that you did as an institution, it helped the South African court to the High Court to come to a decision of saying mining should not take place in that land. How can you say you're not anti-mining? And what we said is that that's because the area of Kolobeni, it's so precious. You know, it's so precious. It is natural area. It is people there have an economic life that is going on. They had tourism that was flourishing in the area. They had animals. They kept their traditional way of living. The area can be enhanced. There can be other, and the community even brought their own alternatives to say, listen, this is the type of development that we want into this land. We are not saying no to development. It's just that we don't want the type of development that our government want to force on us, which is mining. We are sure. We've been to Mpumalanga, we've been to Gauteng, we've been to Johannesburg, we've been to Roodepoort. We've seen the trace. We've been to Rustenburg. We've seen the trace that the mines are leaving. We don't want that kind of development in our own land. We want all the other types of development, including green energy and so on. Can you bring us those? But our government being our government and our politicians being our politicians, they were forcefully trying to force the community of Kolobeni to accept mining of titanium in that land. And it is in that context that the benchmark stood firmly to date, including AIDC. We played a very important role to ensure that the community remained resolute in their decision. They remained resolute. The High Court found a decision in their favor, and they managed to push back. But the mining companies, they are like Draculas. I don't know if you know those. Once they test blood, once they smell blood, they don't run away. They keep coming, and they find all sorts of way to come back. Some of the key leaders in this community have been murdered. They've been shot. People live in fear. They are intimidated all the time. People get arrested. Freedom of movement is limited. The community is being divided for a simple reason. The community say, no, we want development, but we don't want the type of development that you want. So as benchmarks, we remain with such community as well. And equally so in the communities that have given the right of way. Here's another argument that I tend to use. We have brothers and sisters that I know and relatives who work in the mines. We are not saying people who work in the mine, they should be unemployed, because if they become unemployed, we'll have the same problem as we're having now during COVID. They would not be able to feed their own families. They need to work, they need to feed their own. But can mine happen in certain strategically selected areas? Not everywhere, not randomly like South Africa does. You go everywhere, wherever you find mineral, everything must stop, and only mining should supersede everything else. That's where we have a problem when it comes to mining. Therefore, there might be an argument when it comes to that, to say, are you pro-mining or are you anti-mining? So as Benchmarks Foundation and as Alternative Mining Indaba, we are not necessarily saying, even when we say we are saying alternative mining, we are saying we want alternative economies. If there are areas where mining can be done better without leaving the destruction that it's doing, so there be it. We are willing to listen to that. We are willing to work with them. We are willing to monitor that process, to enhance and to improve, to ensure that things are done better, not the way that they've been done over 100 years that we see in South Africa with acid water drainage gushing everywhere. We love rain in Johannesburg, but once it starts over raining and you have water coming from underground, we have acid water running on the surface, and it's starting to affect the surface water and so on, which is a problem. We don't want any of those things. So, but if there are areas, if there are possibilities, if there are alternative means of economy, renewable energy, if there are things that can be recycled, let that be part of the economy. So Alternative Mining Indaba is a platform where it says we are not only saying mining it's totally bad. We are saying if there are things that can be improved in mining, can we look at those? Can we not move in areas where the committee have not given a consent to mining to take place in that area? Can we respect the rights of the people to say no if they say no? In the event where we moved and they give us a consent, would it be possible for us to respect and to meet those agreements that we set with the community? Can the community for the first time be better off and not be worse off? Because I'll tell you, the experience in South Africa is that the communities that are affected and impacted by mining, they tend to be worse off than better off. They inherit the damage, they inherit the pollution, they inherit waste, they inherit everything that is wrong. And as soon as the mine extract and got what they want, they go and their management. And they leave many towns. You can go to Velkom, we have a town that is similar called Velkom. You go to Kitwe in Zambia and you go to Velkom. It's almost like cut and paste. The towns, they are becoming skeleton as soon as the mines leaves, because they are very identical. As soon as the mines leave, they don't leave anything. They don't leave post-mining resources to ensure that after the mine is closed down, the economy of that community continues to advance. So the Alternative Mining Indaba platform, it is a platform that is actually meant to create alternatives, not only to say no to mining, but to say, could mining be done better? In the event where mining cannot be done better, could we find other alternatives of ensuring that people can still sustain themselves?
Kia, can mining be done better? Do we have examples?
No, I mean, the only example we have is historical examples, like what Comrade Brown was mentioning, that there's Ghanaian comrades who will come through and let you know that, look, we've been mining gold in Ghana for years, so don't come with these concepts of that there's no way to mine sustainably. I think the issues is how mining takes place right now, and how, I guess, they figured that this model is the best and quickest and easiest way to make money, and they're going to make sure that they replicate this model everywhere. And I think and what Comrade Brown was saying, and I wanted to expand a little bit on it, is that for us, the work around the Southern African campaign to dismantle corporate power, and of course the right to say no, based on the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, is the element of not being is the element of communities, workers, and minority groups being at the forefront of making decisions. And right now there's a gross power imbalance between the people, states, and transnational corporations. And what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we sever that power imbalance? That those who are supposed to be living, breathing, working, and getting stuff from the lands are the ones that are at the forefront of deciding what in actual fact happens. It's about making sure that people that have been told continuously that they're disenfranchised, they don't matter, they don't have any power, we don't care what they have to say, are at the forefront of saying, we have the power, we are the people, and we want to determine what takes place. So we work very closely with Amadiba Crisis Committee in Kolobeni, not only for them to defend their right to say no, but to expand what we call the yes element. And the yes element is the alternative. There's plethora of examples of communities and people around the world who are living differently than the current economic development paradigm that we see in South Africa and in many other African countries too. And we're wanting to make sure that we amplify those alternatives, those different ways of living, as sort of, I guess, maybe strengthening indigenous knowledge of how one can have a symbiotic relationship with nature and people. And the crisis right now, and the thing that's exacerbating the crisis, and one of the issues that we're wanting to work on, is that there isn't a symbiotic relationship between nature and people. The only relationship that exists is that we shall take, exploit, kill, and plunder by any means necessary. And that's the nub of the issue here. The issue in the conversation is not about, no, we don't want development. It's about what kind of development we want to change the world. I mean, comrades will know that we're facing an ecological crisis. So if we're wanting to mine the way we are mining, we are continuing and exacerbating the climate crisis as it is. And the work around the right to say no, and the work around dismantling corporate power, is to strengthen and build with communities alternative, new, fresh, better, different ways of living, and creating a society and a world that works for people and the earth.
That's very encouraging to hear, because I think one of our weaknesses has often been to focus on opposition alone, but we need to be able to consider the propositional ideas. That is to say that we want to create a new world. It's not merely opposing the exploitation and destruction of the old. And I think that's a really important dynamic. And I think the Alternative Mining Indaba is a really important venue where that creativity can find release, find an opportunity to be articulated and deepened. I want to thank both of you, Comrade Brown and Comrade Kea, for joining us on this show. It's been really interesting. I wish we could talk all day, but I think our audience will be exhausted by that. But let me say thank you, Comrade Brown. Thank you, Comrade Kea, for this really incredibly interesting discussion. Keep well, look after yourselves, and keep the struggle going.
Thank you.
Continua.
Okay.
The people.
Aluta continua.
Amanda.
You know, in where I come from, they translate Aluta continua as the looting continues. So on that, so with that word, wish you well and say thanks once again.
Thanks, comrade. Cheers. And thanks for inviting
Bye.
us.
Thank you.
Bye.